AppSec engineers. In this video, we'll be looking at the all-important topic that especially relates to security and DevSecOps, which is security unit testing. Now, I'm going to build and show you how you can potentially build out a very solid practice of security unit testing within your own organization. So without further ado, let's get started. Now, let's talk about what it means to do security unit testing. Now, security unit testing is like any other unit test. So, unit test is basically the smallest possible test that you can run on a piece of software. That's the broad, high level definition of what a unit test is. Now, typically, unit test is something that is written by a developer to test a function for whether it works correctly or not. So, let's say there's a function called is authorized or access exam, whatever it is. The developer writes a small test where they simulate whether that particular function, which is the smallest unit of testing that you would do, is working as per the requirements of the application, right? Working as per the requirements of that particular application. And that unit test is typically loaded as part of the CI/CD pipeline. All of them are run as part of your standard testing approaches, and once the unit tests pass, only then the code is integrated into the repository, and then of course from there it becomes a package and whatnot. So that's typically what a security or a unit test is. Now, a security unit test is also pretty similar to that, except that it's not very prevalent. You don't see too many people doing security unit tests. Most of the time, security tests are done towards the end of the cycle, right? You typically see that security tests are done once the deployment is about to happen or once the release package is ready for deployment or something like that. So that is one approach to doing security tests, and you typically see that either being done with SAST or DAST or whatever it is, but that's typically where most of us do security testing. And unfortunately, that's not the best thing to do, simply because when you're doing security testing that late or even later on in the cycle at any given point in time, you're really not getting the value of the things that you could have caught earlier, right? The later you identify security issues, the more expensive it gets, the more time consuming it gets, and so on. So by doing these tests earlier, it's always better. That's point number one. Point number two, running a security unit test help your developers understand how to think about security, right? How to think about security is something your developers tend to understand when they run security unit tests. So that will help them not only understand the test itself or approach these features from a security mindset, but also gives them a much better understanding of security from a from that perspective, right? So it's really useful for people to understand what a security unit test is and run security unit tests from that perspective. The third thing that a security unit test is beneficial for is that it's great for testing certain types of security issues. So, for instance, you want to test authorization issues or access control issues or slightly more complicated authentication issues and so on. Security unit tests are great, right? Because security unit tests help you focus in on that particular feature for your function, and that is customized to your application. So it gives you not only the ability to dig into things that a typical scanner may not find, but also gives you the ability to focus in on that feature and write a test for it so that you can load it as part of your pipeline and as part of your CI/CD infrastructure. So all of these are huge benefits of security unit testing. We're going to look at the approach I'm going to take in the next part of this video. I'm going to take to write these security unit tests is something that it's called TDD, or test-driven development. Now, this is a very interesting approach to writing code in itself. It's not just an interesting approach to writing tests, but the way you write code itself can be profoundly influenced by using TDD. Now, what is TDD, or test-driven development? Now, as the name suggests, the development is test driven. Now, what does that mean? Now, basically, it works like this. Now, before you write code, you write the tests. Get those tests to fail, and then write the code to adhere to those tests. And that's basically what TDD is all about. So let's say you want to write some code, you want to write some function for logging in a user, right? Now, let's say you want to write a function for logging in that user. That function will essentially most of us do it this way, where we write the code first. We write the login and then we write the unit test. TDD essentially goes about it in a completely different way. What TDD does is essentially says that, hey, you know what? Write the tests first. What is it that you want in this feature? What do you want to test for this feature? Write them first. Let them all fail and then slowly write the feature that makes these tests pass. That's basically what you want to do. So in our case, what we're going to do is I'm going to write a basic login feature or a basic sign up feature. I'm going to think about what I'm going to do next. And I'm going to come up with TDD capabilities. I'm going to write tests for what that feature is going to be or that feature needs to have in terms of the tests. And then I'm going to write the feature and then we're going to get the test to fail. And then, of course, hopefully pass at the end of the whole thing. So we're going to be using TDD. Now, TDD is a very powerful way to write code because you are writing to a spec, you're writing to a way that the code is always testable at any given point in time. And the feature always has the right kind of tests associated with it. So that's going to be a huge hallmark of TDD. And that's very important for you to know before we get started with this process. All right, we're going to get started with our example today, and I'm going to start this example from scratch. I don't have previous knowledge of how to do this. I'm going to just figure this out as we go. The idea is that I want you to see how this will work when somebody's building it out from scratch, right? So I'm going to start a new Python project, and I'm going to install some dependencies that I need. So I'm going to write a simple API with Fast API, which is a very popular Python API framework, web framework. And I'm going to use Fast API, and I am going to write two functions, which is going to be, I'm going to write two features. Let's not call them functions. One is a sign up feature, and one is a login feature. And we're going to first figure out the tests for both the sign up feature and login feature. And we're going to do set up all the dependencies, and then we're going to get started building the application that we want. Right. So with this in mind, let's get started. We'll start right here from the get go, and I'm going to make unit. I'm going to create a new directory, and I'm going to open it in cursor. Now, oh, sorry, I opened the wrong directory. I should have changed directory, which is kind of necessary. And let's go ahead and do this. Okay, so now the first thing I'm going to do is set up the dependencies for my project. My terminal is below here. So I'm going to set up a Python virtual environment. I'm going to activate that virtual environment. I'm going to install the necessary dependencies. So I'm installing Fast API, which is my web framework, as you can see. That is what I'll be using as the web framework. I'm going to be using something called HTTPX, which is required for Fast API to run the testing client. And then I also need what else do I need? I need a database. I'm going to install the simplest database that I can think of, which is PickleDB, which is the most basic sort of database in Python, just like a key value store. So obviously my capabilities are going to be limited by what I can do here. So let's see what I can do with this. And I think that's pretty good. That should be good enough. I install all these things, and that should take me a little bit of time to install. All right. Now, so it's installed. Now I'm going to create a new file called tests.md. Now this is a markdown file where I'm going to document what are the tests I'm going to write for this to work, right? So we're going to write out tests. So we're going to build out tests for our features. I'm just going to increase my screen res just a little bit. Hopefully everyone can see. For our features, so the first feature is going to be sign up. So let's call this feature : sign up. Now let's see what are the security unit tests for a sign up feature. Okay, so let's think about that. So first of all, I want the user to sign up with an email, which means that user needs to, so let's say I want to do that. User needs to provide a valid email. Okay, so this is the first test that I need to write. User needs to, so the next test I want to write is user needs to provide a a strong password. Now, in our case, well, yes, you have multiple things that you can do, but I'm not interested in doing all of those things. I'm just going to keep it a 10 character strong password. Okay, so of course, there are other things you can do. You can do alphanumeric, whatever. That's up to you. It's really up to whatever you want to do. In this case, I'm just going to give it a 10 character password, right? So, this is what we want to do. The password needs to be stored securely, right? So we need to use something here. We're going to use bcrypt hashed password. So these are the features I want. These are the capabilities. So I need to write out tests to validate all of this. So first of all, so if you think about this, valid email probably have some kind of regex to validate email. This would probably be some kind of validation of size, not of strength, at least of size. We can also do a test whether the password is stored as as a plain text or not. So we can fetch it and check whether the password is plain text or not. So check for plain text password. So all of this is the, let's say these are the things. Of course, there are maybe other things you can do. You can add a captcha, whatever. But I'm just showing you how you can do something like this. So which is why I'm not making it overly complex. This is a pretty straightforward sign up feature. You can do other things as well. Believe me, there are other things you can do. You can do things like captcha, validate captcha, etc., etc. But in our case, we're not integrating with any third party things. And captcha is typically a third party system, so we're not doing any of those things. Right now, well, let's take up the next feature, which is login. Right now, here obviously some of the things kind of repeat. User needs to provide a valid email, and not regex in this case. We need to validate the presence of the email, right? Then user needs to provide the valid password. We need to authenticate the user on the basis of the password. Okay, so you'll see that actually what we're doing here is kind of threat modeling, right? I don't know how many of you know about threat modeling, but what we are doing in this example is basically threat modeling, because we are essentially writing out the security requirements for each feature, and that's basically what it is. And once the user needs to, upon login, user needs to be provided with a authentication token. So let's use the check the presence of the token. We need to probably also do the validity of the token, whatever it is. We'll do that. So we need to install some more libraries. So you can think about this as we are coming up. We have additional things we need to do. We probably need to use some library for this. We probably need to use a library for this. We probably need to use a library for this generation, all of that stuff. We can also add additional things like user should not be able to log in. No, user, yeah, okay. So let's do it this way. User invalid login attempts should be logged in the log file. All right. So this, yeah, check the presence of a log file. You can do that maybe, or you can even do something like validate, maybe look at the login. Let's say you have a time series database, that would be the better thing to do. But in this case, I'm just going to check whether there is a log file in there. So these are some of the things you can do. You can do more, of course, for login. You can do more things. You can do invalid access attempts. You can do brute force protection. You can do all of that stuff. So you can do brute force prevention with restrict multiple logging attempts and so on. Multiple logging attempts. You can do all of that stuff, but I'm obviously going to focus in on these three, and if possible, I'm going to implement this as well. So all of these things are in there. So these are the tests that we want to build. So first, let's build our test file, right? let's build some basic, let's write just a boilerplate app. And okay, and I'm also going to have to install some other stuff. I'm going to have to install the bcrypt for the password hashing. So this is bcrypt. Yeah, this is bcrypt. I'm just going to install pip install bcrypt. And I'm also going to install pyjwt because I need to generate an authentication token once it starts. So both these things are done. Right, so we have all of this being done. Sweet, this is good. I think we are off to a great start. Now let's import bcrypt. Let's also import JWT. Okay, so we're going to use this later. We're going to write some boilerplate and we're going to do app.post. Actually, you know what? Let's write the tests first. Okay, so now we have kind of written the simplest possible app. We've not written anything in this app. I'm just going to check if there's UVCon in here. Not that. Okay, so we need to install UVCon for us to run the app. Yeah, so we're good. Now let's write the tests. So what we're going to do is we're going to write a test file called test underscore app.py. We're also probably going to have to write an init. Maybe not. I'm not sure based on the packaging, but we're not going to, I'm not sure whether we need it or not. So we have an app and we have a testing suite. Now let's actually write out our testing suite first. We would also probably need Pydantic. Pydantic is already there, so okay, that's fine. Right, so let's actually go ahead and do this. So let's write out our tests first. So from fast API dot test client import test client, from dot app import app. So that means we are hooking up to our application, which is an app.py. Then we are writing a test client, which is our test client.app. Now, what we're going to do is test sign up. What is the first thing we're going to run? Sign up. Okay, we're going to do a valid email. We're going to check for a valid email. Right, so let's do that. Sometimes I really dislike having to deal with AI generated code, but sometimes it's super useful. So let's see what that does. So here you will see that we can write out a test. So which means that we're going to try and send a regular email. We are also going to try and sign up with an invalid email. So we're going to have a positive test. We're also going to have test sign up invalid email. Then we are also going to do valid password. We're also going to do invalid password. So let's keep these 4 tests for the sign up feature, right? So we're going to write these 4 tests for the sign up feature. Now, the first thing we're going to do is we're going to write a response, which is going to be client.post. This is going to be to a sign up endpoint. And actually, this is the problem when you use, okay, let's do this. Yeah. Okay, perfect. Now we are going to use test at test.com. So this is our valid email, obviously. And password is, we are obviously going to give it a strong password. Testing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 should be fine. Okay. Now, if this code, if the response to this is 200, and if the cert response.json. So I want to see a success message indicator here. Dot get success. So we want to see a success true message. So this is our first test that we wrote. We actually, before writing our app, we wrote our first test, right? Now, if we do this and we run this, which is what TDD typically wants us to do, you will see that it fails the test. So if I run pytest. Config test.py, I think I need to write. Config. I think I need to create a file called config test.py. Oh, I think I need to install pytest as well. Hold on. That's strange. Okay. Oh yeah, I think I need to install pytest. Pip install test. Yeah, here you go. Yeah, so it says no import with no package. Maybe just this should suffice. Yeah, maybe that should work just fine. So when I run, it will fail, obviously. There is nothing in there. There is no sign up function. There is nothing right now. It fails. So that is expected. Now let's make the first test pass. Okay. Now let's make the first test pass. And we're going to use a few things to actually write this out. Now let's actually write out our first function, which is def. Let's actually app.post sign up. Let's write the sign up function, but before that, let's write out a model that we can use to sign up. So from identity import base model, typing, we don't need the optional stuff. So let's actually do class user, which is our base model. We have an email, we have a password. So these, let's say we are going with the most basic of models, we have this. This is what we have. Okay. Now let's check out if Pydantic has an email field as to how we can do this. Oh yeah, looks like it does. Sorry. Yeah, looks like it does. Now we will use the email string here. Okay, so hopefully this validates the email string. And so Pydantic is nice. Pydantic is my favorite library to use regardless. Now, also, I am going to set up another validation here, which is going to be, I'm going to have a field validator here, which is going to be min length. I'm not going to set up a max length at all. I'm going to say min length is equal to 10. Okay, so just with this, we have done a bunch of things. We've already addressed 10 characters, we've done email. We have obviously not done this yet, but we've kind of done a lot of this, which is pretty cool. So sign up, we have a user, and oh wow, this is pretty cool. This is why I love the whole process. Now, I'm also going to have to store this in a database. So I'm going to say pickle db spelling. Geez, pickle db, simple stuff. Okay, so I'm going to say, now here, I'm going to initialize my database, pickledb.load, user.db, and here we are going to, now what does this output? This output bytes and dot decode. That's what we want. This outputs bytes. We want it to be stored as string. So we are going to set the user and a hashed password. That's it. So we'll set the email as the key, and we're going to set the hash password. Okay, so this is what we're doing, and success true. Let's say message. Yeah, we're not going to obviously respond with the password. That's a horrible practice. Don't do that. Okay, so now we have everything we need. So we've actually written a sign up function. Let's try and get it to pass the first test. Okay, let's see whether it passes the first test or not. Now, when we run this, oops. Okay, I needed to install one more thing, which is fine. So I needed another package for Pydantic email validation. Pydantic, need the double quotes here. I didn't know that. Okay, here we go. So clearly it adds some additional parameters that it needs for it to work. Let's see whether this works. So now when we run PyTest, it says yes, we passed the test. We have a working example here. So clearly we were able to pass our test. This is great. So we got a status code, we got success, blah, 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 etc. Now, let's say the, so let's do this, right? Now we are trying to handle this. We are validating against an email field. So if this fails, I wonder what happens actually, because we're not validating it inside the function. So let's actually write our test and see what happens. So in this case, we're just going to copy this. And here we're going to say test at. We're not going to give a valid email, obviously. All of that is going to be there. We're not going to give a valid email. That's not happening. Okay, we don't have an invalid email. Now, shall we do? Okay, so now, obviously, as you can see, I'm not the best developer out there, but this is just for me to understand how this would work exactly. So, all right. So now we have a test here, and this should ideally fail. Now let's actually fail this and see how this works. I'm not sure whether there is an assert. Okay, so what happens if pydantic validation fails? Pydantic. Okay. Okay, okay, okay. The cursor can be important. Okay, I think this is okay, this is not ideal. Yeah. Email validator. Yeah, this is fine. I think we're good here. Let's see what happens. I don't know whether it failed or not. Let's actually see. Let's try and add an exception handler here. I'm just going to add a generic exception handler for now. I don't know what is the exception. We're going to, it's going to return. Yeah, so we're going to, yeah, so we're going to return an HTTP exception. So one of the cool things I learned about this was that if the validation fails here, it just throws a 422 error. So what we need to do is validate for a 422 unprocessable entity error. So that's what we're looking for. So that's pretty cool actually. Now we're going to do a test of password, a valid password, which we have already got. We already have a valid password, so this should work if we just use this test again. And you will see that we should be able to assert response code. We should also be able to assert a success message. Now let's actually run this and see. When we run this, yeah, all 4 tests have passed. Obviously, the 4th test is nothing, but regardless, that passes as well. Now let's try and do a negative test case on the invalid password. So the same thing, except that we're going to test for, and you can see that a lot of this over time becomes reusable, right? So in this case, what we're doing is we're having a valid email, but an invalid password. Okay. Valid email, invalid password doesn't meet the test of 10. So we should look for a 422 unprocessable entity error. So when we do this, we say yes, all 4 tests have successfully passed. So we actually have, against this, you'll see that this is done. And this is done. Now we can, I mean, I'm not sure whether I'm going to do this at this stage because I need to check for plain text password, plain text password inside the database, and all of those things need to be done. But I'm not sure whether I'm going to do this in this case, but you get the idea. You should be able to do this or something like this regardless of how you approach this. So yeah, so PickleDB, let me just see whether I've done it right or wrong here. I might have made a couple of mistakes with the. Oh, okay. Got it. I think I made a mistake. Yeah. So this should work now in the sense that previously the password was PickleDB was not storing. So now I'm just going to have to do db.dump, which means it stores it in a file. That's what it does. So now when I run this again, it should say that, yeah, now you'll see user.db. Yeah. So I can essentially query this and essentially get $2b or whatever it is. I can do that. Make sure the $2b dollar is there, which is bcrypt. It's kind of a very crude test. I don't know whether bcrypt has any function within the API that will help me check for whether it's a bcrypt hashed password or not. I am not sure about that, but yeah, not 100% sure about whether that would work or not. All right. So, but this works. It just fine. So we seem to have the most of the tests done for the sign up function, which is great. Now on to the login function, which should be pretty quick. Now, the login function is, let's write the test first, as always. Now let's first add, I don't know which password is getting stored here. That is the interesting thing. Okay. Test@test.com. Yeah, we're using the same thing in multiple places. That's obviously failing. Test@test.com, that's passing. Test.test.com, this is also passing. We're signing up, but it's only storing one. Oh, it's probably storing the first one or the last one. I'm not sure. Oh, this is not going to work. So it's probably storing the first one, the second one, which is identical. So that's fine. That's not an issue. Okay, cool. Now, when you want to do things like this, you should ideally have things like fixtures where you delete data, clear the data, and then start again. I'm not doing any of that. I'm just going to go with this as is. So now I'm just going to do yeah, this is actually this is where AI really helps, right? Whether there's an existing user or not, that's actually part of the sign up process. That's one of the features we should have tested for, whether a unique user exists. This is important. We didn't test for this. We didn't test for this. So this is actually pretty cool because now I can just write get user. Get, if it's not there, we don't need an exception. Okay, if it does not get, what happens if it does not get? I'm just trying to see if what happens if PickleDB is not able to find. Is that an exception or does it come back with a none? Dot get. Let's just see what is happening in the API. So when you do get, oh, otherwise it's a key error. Okay, so except key error as key, not key, ke, return false, return none, return. You don't even need to return none again. So this is actually an important check, right? You need to first check. You need to first check if there is if there is a user already in that as that particular user. So is there a user already with the same email? If there is, you should not sign that person up. Okay, so let's actually do that. Yeah, if get user, yeah, so this is perfect. We've already done this. So in this case, we should have written test sign up duplicate email test@test.com, and this will also obviously get affected. This will be 400 now. Actually, let's do a different one. Let's just do test@email.com here, and let's do let's keep it that way, more specific to this. I'm just going to do this, take this and just change out the email. So what I'm doing here is I'm essentially signing up with the same user. In this case, it should give me a fail. So I should get a 400 status code. Okay. So let's actually run this. So AI prompted me very nicely because it told me that, hey, you need to check this. What about unique user exists? Valid, absolutely valid. So this is very clearly an issue that we have. Um, Great, perfect. So this should work. Let's actually run the, I'm going to delete the database. This is kind of manual process, which is not ideal, but that's fine. Ideally, you should have a clear function that clears everything and then starts, from the beginning. That's a nicer way of doing it, but hey, it's fine. So looks like we have a winner here. We have both the users, we have all that stuff. Perfect. This seems to work exactly as intended. If you really want to see this you want to see the logs of this, you can actually see with pytest-ss. So you'll see, I think it's pytest-ss. No, I don't think anything is getting printed out. So yeah, but if you had some print values there, that would get printed out of pytest.ss. Anyway, so now we have our valid user, valid password, whatever, the login tests. Right. So now let's actually implement a set of tests for the login feature that we have. Now the test, first of all, it needs to be a valid email, which means that the email needs to be valid, and then the needs to be a valid password, and then upon login you need to get an authentication token. Okay. So let's check if there is a def test login valid email. Let's do this with obviously both a valid email and a valid password. Okay. So here we are going to use the same thing, and we should see 200. Let's just test for that right now. Okay. Testing to see whether this is a valid email. So this is an email that is in there. It should check for this. Now let's also at the meantime do the same thing with an invalid email. With an invalid email, test at blah.com, and this should be a 400. Now let's implement the login function. So let's do app.login def login user. Yep, I think we're good. Yes. So so it's already done everything. This is one of the cool things with Copilot AI generated code. This is just phenomenal. Just does everything for you. So it's so cool. Yeah. So you can see that here. Let's look at the function that it wrote and see whether it's actually doing what we're supposed to get it to do. So this should return something. If it does not, then we throw 400 and say email does not exist. If not, the password getting validated correctly, then we have a 400 invalid password. Else, if all of this is good, we return a token. Right? So we're actually implemented the function. Let's go ahead and run our test. Looks like there is some issue. Oh, I need to delete. This is the problem. This is the problem when you don't have your cleanup functions written in your tests. Yeah, works. So yeah, usually there should be a cleanup function. I always recommend please do that. Always start with a cleanup. In fact, you can just write that, right? I could have written that, but I'm not sure how that would behave in this mode, so I don't want to chance it. In any case, this is pretty straightforward. You see that already implemented. So two of the tests have actually already been done. So let's actually try a invalid test, right? So if this password, the user is there is check whether user or password are decoded. Let's first see whether the invalid password. So test def test login So this is a valid password, obviously. We want to test for that. And we also want to test for an invalid password. We're going to test for this password being nonsense. So in this case, we get 400. And let's just delete our database right now. Try it again. So you can see that by doing this kind of an approach, okay, looks like, okay, unprocessable. Oh, that's because of the 10 characters. That's because of 10 characters. Um, oh, by approaching it this way, you will see that you can build much more resilient applications because you are considering the security features right up front, and you are writing tests to validate those security features at the time you're building code itself. And if unit tests you can see that runs extremely fast. This runs in 1.22 seconds. So it's not a blocker on the CI/CD environment as well. So you'll see that unit tests typically run very, very quickly. So you should not have that issue. And it's customized, it's built for your application. You can, and the thing that this is, I've tested pretty standard features, but there are going to be other features where you're going to be testing authorization or you have authorization calls necessary and all of that stuff. Those things are going to be much more complicated than this. So in that way, it becomes much easier for you to do it through unit tests than having to try and find it through a SAS scanner or a DAST tool or a pen tester doing it. This is a much cheaper and a much faster way of being able to compose this and actually getting it to work and introduce a lot of discipline and a lot of security goodness earlier on in your cycle rather than doing it much later in your cycle. So this is one of the ways in which you can approach security unit tests. It's one of the best things that you can do for your organization. If you want to include it in your SDLC, I highly recommend it. This is just one way of doing it. There are multiple other approaches you can take, but this is one of the ways that I really prefer using it, using TDD, things like that. So I hope you found this video useful. If you do, please like and subscribe to our channel. And please share this if you enjoyed this sort of content. Thank you very much for watching. Bye-bye.